The boy should hold the company." That's what my father said. He said it at the quarterly meeting in front of 19 people while he slid his shares across the table to my brother who had never landed a single account. Me, I'd landed everyone keeping that plant alive. I clapped, I cleared my desk, and I said nothing about June, when our largest client renews and whose name they only ever sign for. I'm Tessa Ellison, 35, and I'd spent 11 years being the reason Ellison Print Works still had a door to open. Let me tell you exactly how my family handed away a company they thought was theirs. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and floor polish. It always did on meeting days. My mother insisted on the good coffee for the quarterly, and someone always left the pot on too long, so it tasted like the bottom of a tin. 19 chairs. A table my grandfather had built from reclaimed oak when he opened the shop in 1971. The same table where I'd done my homework as a kid, where I'd signed my first vendor contract at 24. I sat in my usual seat, third from the end, with my laptop and a leather folder of renewal numbers nobody had asked me to bring. I always brought them anyway. That was the job. Know the accounts, know the dates, know which client paid late and which one paid early if you sent a handwritten note with the invoice. I knew all of it. I had it in my head the way some people know song lyrics. My father stood at the head of the table. Gerald Ellison, 68, in the navy blazer he wore for anything he considered important. He cleared his throat the way he did before saying something he'd rehearsed. "Family, partners, friends," he said. "Today, we make this official." I thought he meant the new press we'd financed. I'd built the proposal for it. I smiled, ready. He didn't mean the press. "After a great deal of thought," my father continued, "your mother and I have decided to transfer our ownership stake to Bradley. He'll be taking the company forward." The room did that thing rooms do when something lands wrong. A small ripple. A few people looked at me. Most looked at their hands. Bradley sat across from me in a charcoal suit he'd bought for the occasion. My brother, 39, 4 years older than me, and grinning like a kid at his own birthday. I'm going to back up because you need to understand who Bradley was before you can understand what he did with the company. Not a long history, just enough. Bradley was the firstborn. In our family, that meant something close to royalty. He got the bigger bedroom, the new car at 16, the assumption that whatever he touched would turn to gold because he was the one who'd carry the Ellison name. He worked at the plant on and off for years, mostly off. He'd come in for a few months, decide management didn't appreciate his vision, and drift toward whatever new thing caught him. A food truck once, a real estate license he never used, a crypto thing in 2021 that I'm fairly sure my parents quietly covered. And every time he drifted back, my father said the same thing. "Bradley's got the head for the big picture. I had the head for the actual picture, the one with deadlines and margins in it." "Congratulations," I said to him across the table. "I meant it the way you mean it when you've practiced not flinching your whole life." Bradley nodded at me like a man accepting a tribute. What none of them knew was that I'd been to lunch the week before with the person who actually decided whether Ellison Print Works lived or died, and it wasn't anyone in that room. The biggest account we had was a company called Marrow and Vine. They were a regional grocery chain, 41 stores across 3 states, and growing. Every flyer, every shelf tag, every seasonal circular, every loyalty mailer. They printed millions of pieces a year through us. That single contract was 38% of our annual revenue. Without it, the plant didn't break even. With it, we could keep 46 people employed and the lights on. Marrow and Vine had been our client for 9 years. And here's the thing my father never quite absorbed because it didn't fit how he thought the world worked. They were our client because of me, not the price. Plenty of shops could match our price, not the equipment. Anyone could buy a press. Me. Their head of procurement was a woman named Diane Halloran, and 9 years ago she'd been a junior buyer nobody returned calls to. I returned her calls. I drove out to her first store opening with proofs in my own car when the courier fell through. I caught a color error on a holiday circular at 11 at night and reprinted 40,000 pieces at our cost rather than let her get blamed for it. When her mother passed, I sent flowers from me, not from the company. 9 years of that. She'd told me once plainly over coffee, "Tessa, I sign with people, not with logos. You leave, I leave." I'd laughed it off at the time. I wasn't laughing now. My father was still talking. He'd moved on to a little speech about legacy in the future. Bradley was nodding along, already rearranging the company in his head. My mother sat beside him with her hands folded, smiling the way she smiled in church. The renewal for Marrow and Vine was due in June, 6 weeks away, and it had only ever been signed because Diane Halloran trusted me. If you've ever sat at a table while the people who were supposed to value you handed your work to someone else and called it natural, stay with me, because what happened over the next 90 days is the reason I'm telling you this at all. If this is already hitting you somewhere familiar, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me get back to that room. The meeting moved on to the formal vote. It was a formality, the way these things are when the decision's already made over dinner. But I want to be precise about what happened next, because it's the part my family rewrote later. After the vote, my father turned to me directly. The room was still half listening. "Tessa," he said, in the warm voice he used when he wanted something to sound like a gift instead of a demotion. "Nothing changes for you. You'll keep handling the accounts. You're so good with the clients. Bradley will set the direction and you'll keep doing what you do best." There it was. The whole shape of how they saw me, said out loud in one sentence. Bradley sets direction. Tessa does the work. "Of course," I said. My mother beamed. "She's always been our worker bee." Worker bee. She said it like a compliment. She'd been saying it like a compliment for 30 years. I looked down at the leather folder in front of me. 11 years of renewals. Every account I'd brought in. Every fire I'd put out at midnight. The press proposal I'd written that we'd just approved. All of it, in my handwriting, in my head, in my hands, and not one share with my name on it. I didn't argue. I want to be clear about that, because later they'd say I made a scene. I didn't make a scene. I picked up my folder. I told Bradley I was happy for him, and I went back to my office and answered the emails that had stacked up during the meeting. There were 11 of them. 3 were on fire. I put them all out, the way I always did. Then I sat for a moment and looked at the wall of my office. I'd hung a framed print there years ago, the first job I'd ever sold solo, a little run of business cards for a bakery that had since grown into 6 locations. I'd kept it because it reminded me that I was good at this, that I could build something from a cold call and a handshake. I'd built a lot from cold calls and handshakes. I just hadn't built it for me. That night, I drove home and didn't tell my husband, Paul, right away. He could see it on my face anyway. Paul's a high school shop teacher, calm in a way that took me years to trust, and he just put a plate in front of me and waited. "They gave the company to Bradley," I finally said. He set down his fork. "All of it?" "All of it, and told me nothing changes. I keep the accounts. Bradley sets the vision." Paul was quiet for a while. He's not a dramatic man. Then he said the thing I'd been circling all day without landing on. "Tessa, what happens in June?" I looked at him. "The Marrow and Vine renewal," he said. "Who signs that?" And there it was, out loud in my own kitchen, in the voice of the only person who actually saw what I did all day. "Diane signs it," I said, "and Diane signs it for me." Paul didn't say anything dramatic. He just nodded slowly, like a man watching weather change. "Then I'd be careful about quitting before you understand exactly what you're holding," he said. "I want to tell you I had a plan that night. I didn't. What I had was a fact, sitting cold in my chest, and the strange quiet that comes when you finally stop arguing with people who were never going to hear you. The first week under Bradley was a study in a man who'd never run anything trying to run everything. He moved into the corner office, Dad's old office with the window that looked over the loading dock, within 2 days. He had it repainted. He bought a standing desk and a leather chair that cost more than our newest junior operator made in a month. He sent an all-staff email with the subject line, "A New Chapter," that used the word synergy 3 times. The 46 people who worked the floor read it, shrugged, and went back to running the presses. The presses didn't care about synergy. They cared about ink, paper, calibration, and deadlines, things Bradley had never personally touched. I kept my head down and did my job. That first week, I closed a renewal with a regional law firm and brought in a new client, a craft brewery that wanted labels and table tents. Small, but clean money. I logged it, I forwarded the paperwork, and I waited to see if Bradley would even notice. He noticed enough to mention it in the next all-staff email as the momentum the new leadership is already generating. The new leadership. I'd made the calls. I'd driven out to the brewery on my lunch hour. But sure, new leadership. It got more pointed than emails, too. That first Friday, Bradley called an all-staff town hall, which was a new thing he'd invented, mostly so he could stand at the front of the room and be looked at. He talked for 20 minutes about culture and vision. Then he opened it up, and a junior operator, a quiet kid named Danny who actually ran our second press, raised his hand and asked a real question. He asked whether the paper supplier change he'd heard rumors about would affect the grocery account's color quality, because he'd noticed the sample stock looked flat. A good question. The exact right question, actually. Bradley smiled the way you smile at a child. I appreciate the input, but let's leave the strategy to the people whose job it is to think about strategy. You worry about the press, I'll worry about the company. A couple of people laughed nervously. The kid went red and sat down. Then Bradley looked across the room at me, and he made it a joke at my expense, the way he always did when he could. Tessa can tell you, he said, grinning. She's been here forever. She's great at the day-to-day stuff, the little details. That's her gift. Right, sis? Leave the vision to me. You keep the trains running. The room went quiet in that specific way. 40 people who knew exactly who kept the trains running and exactly who'd never once been on time for one. A few of them looked at me to see what I'd do. I didn't do anything. I smiled, the practiced smile, and said, "Trains run great when somebody pays attention to the schedule." A couple of people laughed. For me this time, not at the kid. And Bradley's grin tightened just slightly because he could feel it land sideways but couldn't tell why. But I saw the operator's face. Danny, the kid who'd asked the smart question and been slapped down for it in front of everyone. I caught him at his press afterward. "That was a good question," I told him. "You were right about the stock. Don't stop asking good questions." "He made me feel like an idiot," the kid said. "He makes everyone feel like an idiot," I said. "It's the only way he knows how to feel tall." I tapped the press. "You know more about this machine than he ever will. Remember that." I didn't know it then, but that kid would be one of the first people I called when I opened my own shop. People remember who made them feel small, and they remember who told them the truth at the press. Bradley was very good at the first thing. He had no idea it was costing him every person who could have saved him. I almost let it go. That's the part of myself I've had to look at honestly since. How many times I almost let it go. How trained I was to be the worker bee who hummed along and didn't sting. But something had shifted at that table. Not anger, exactly. More like a lock turning. I stopped doing the small, invisible things I'd always done for free. For 11 years, I'd been the one who reminded everyone of renewal dates a month out, who flagged when a client seemed cool on the phone, who noticed when a competitor was sniffing around an account. I held all of it in my head and quietly steered around the rocks before anyone else saw them. Now I just did my listed job. Accounts in my name, I serviced. The rest of it, the invisible steering, I stopped. I didn't sabotage anything. I want to be precise because this matters. I didn't hide a single thing. Every account file was where it had always been. Every contact was in the shared system. Every renewal date was in the calendar that anyone could open. I just stopped being the person who remembered for them. And here's what I learned in those first weeks. A company can run for a surprisingly long time on momentum it didn't earn. Things I'd set up years ago kept humming. Clients kept paying. Bradley walked the floor with his coffee and felt like a king. He had no idea the foundation was a person, and the person had stopped pouring. 2 weeks in, my mother called me. Carol Ellison, 66, the family's official keeper of how things look. She wanted to have lunch. "Just us girls," she said, which is how she'd referred to the two of us my whole life, even when I was running a department and she was retired. We met at a tea room she liked, the kind with floral wallpaper and tiny sandwiches. She ordered for both of us without asking, the way she always did. "I wanted to make sure there are no hard feelings," she said, patting my hand. "About the company." There aren't," I said, which was almost true in the way that a closed door isn't a slammed one. "Good. Because you have to understand, Tessa. Bradley's a man. He has a family to provide for someday. You have Paul, you're comfortable. Bradley needs this more than you do. I set down my tea. Mom, Bradley's wife left in 2019. He doesn't have kids. I'm the one with a mortgage. She waved this away like a fly. You know what I mean. The name. Ellison Print Works. It should be carried by an Ellison. I'm an Ellison. She smiled at me, gently, like I'd said something charming and slightly slow. You'll always be our girl. But it's different. You know it's different. I did know. I'd known it my whole life. I just hadn't expected her to say it so plainly over cucumber sandwiches. Here's what I want you to understand about my mother, because she's not a cartoon. She grew up in a family where her own brothers got everything, and she got a hope chest and a wedding. She'd absorbed the rules so deeply she couldn't see it as a rule anymore. It was just water. To her, giving the company to the son wasn't an injustice. It was the natural order, the same order that had erased her. She was passing down the exact thing that had hurt her, and she'd convinced herself it was love. That's the part that's harder to be angry at, and the part that's hardest to forgive. There's one thing, I said, keeping my voice even. The Marrow and Vine renewal. It's due in June. Does Bradley know how to handle Diane? My mother blinked. Who? Diane Halloran, their head of procurement. Our biggest account. 38% of revenue. I'm sure Bradley has it under control. He's very good with people. I let it go. I'd asked. I'd planted the seed plain as day at a table in a flowered tea room. Nobody could ever say I didn't warn them. Then she said the thing that, looking back, was the moment I stopped reaching for them. And honestly, Tessa, it's good for you too. Less pressure. You can finally relax and let Bradley be the face. You were never really the leadership type. You're more behind the scenes. It suits you. I'd brought in every major account we had. I'd negotiated our paper contracts down by 11% during a supply crunch that nearly closed 2 competitors. I'd kept Marrow and Vine for 9 years on the strength of who I was. Behind the scenes, it suits you. I smiled, paid for my own lunch despite her protest, and drove back to the plant. And somewhere on that drive, the last little voice that had spent 35 years trying to win their approval finally went quiet. Not bitter, just done. That afternoon, something happened that I didn't understand the weight of until much later. I'd been cleaning out a storage closet off the main floor. Bradley wanted it converted into what he called a collaboration nook, which meant a couch and a coffee machine nobody asked for. In the back, behind boxes of old letterhead, I found a flat metal document box that had belonged to my grandfather. It had his initials scratched into the lid. E.J.E. Edward James Ellison. I knew that box. I'd seen it as a kid on his desk where he kept the things that mattered. I'd assumed it was lost decades ago. Inside were a few brittle photographs, his old reading glasses, and a single folded sheet of paper, yellowed and soft at the creases. His handwriting, in pencil, faded but legible. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a contract. It was a note he'd written to himself, the kind a man writes when he's trying to figure out what he believes. A company is not a building, it read. It is not a press or a name on a sign. A company is the people who keep their word to the people who pay them. Whoever holds the relationships holds the company. Everything else is rented. I sat on an overturned box of letterhead and read it 4 times. My grandfather, the man whose name was on the sign, the man my father invoked every time he talked about legacy, had understood the one thing my father never did. The company wasn't the oak table. It wasn't the presses. It wasn't even the name. It was the relationships, and the relationships were mine. I didn't show the note to anyone. I folded it back along its old creases and put it in my bag next to the framed bakery business cards I hadn't taken down yet. Some things you don't argue with people about. You just carry them, quietly, until the day they explain themselves. That note became the thing I held in my chest through everything that came after. Whoever holds the relationships holds the company. Everything else is rented. My father had rented my grandfather's company to my brother and called it an inheritance. The next morning, I had coffee with Renee before the floor got loud. She was on the new initiatives team by then, which mostly meant she sat at a desk waiting for initiatives that never came, watching 18 years of expertise go to waste. He moved me off the dental group, she said quietly, stirring her coffee. I've handled them for 12 years. 12! He gave them to a kid who started in March and told me it was a fresh eyes strategy. I'd known Renee a long time. She wasn't dramatic. She was the kind of steady that holds a place together without anyone noticing. The dental group's going to walk, she said. They liked me. The kid doesn't know their billing cycle, doesn't know the office manager's name, doesn't know they need every proof a day early because the dentist reviews them on Sundays. He doesn't know any of it. Did you tell Bradley? She gave me a tired smile. Tessa, did telling Bradley anything ever work? It hadn't. Not once. And here, talking to Renee over bad coffee, I understood that I wasn't the only worker bee in that building. There were a dozen Renees and Hectors, people who'd held the actual company in their hands for years while the family passed the deed around like it was the company. Bradley had just decided in one quarter that all of that knowledge was replaceable, that relationships were a junior staff problem, and vision was the real work. I'm thinking about leaving, Renee said. I'm 56. I don't know what's out there for me, but I can't watch them throw away a client list I built for 18 years and pretend it's strategy. I didn't tell her my own thoughts yet. They weren't formed enough. But I reached across the break room table and put my hand on hers. Whatever you decide, I said, you're not the problem here. You know that, right? She nodded, but I could tell she didn't quite believe it. That's the thing about being told for years that you're support staff. You start to believe the building stands on its own. It doesn't. I was about to watch exactly what happens when the people who actually hold it up decide to stop. Around the 4-week mark, Bradley started making changes. His first big idea was to cut costs. Sensible, on paper. The problem was he had no idea which costs were load-bearing. He saw a line item for client relationship expenses, a few $1,000s a year that I used for things like driving proofs out personally, sending flowers when clients had a death in the family, the handwritten note stamps, the occasional lunch. He cut it to 0. We're not a charity, he told the room. He cut the part-time courier we used for rush jobs, the one who'd saved more deadlines than I could count. Clients can wait for standard shipping, he said. He moved a longtime account manager, a kind, steady woman named Renee who'd been with us 18 years, off the accounts she knew and onto a new initiatives team that didn't really have work yet, because he wanted someone younger and hungrier on the front-facing roles. Renee saw the writing on the wall and gave notice within the month. Each of these felt small. Each one pulled a thread. I watched it happen and I said nothing because I'd been told, clearly, that I set no direction. I serviced my listed accounts. I did them well. And I watched my brother, who'd never sweated a deadline in his life, casually unscrew the bolts holding up a building he didn't know he was standing in. One afternoon he came by my office, leaning in the doorway with his coffee. He'd taken to leaning in doorways. It made him feel like a boss in a movie. Hey, sis, he said. Quick thing, the Marrow and Vine account. The renewal's coming up, right? I want to take the lead on that one. It's our biggest. Should be a leadership thing. I looked up from my screen. Sure, I said. Their contact is Diane Halloran. She's been with us 9 years. The renewal's the 2nd week of June. Great, send me her info. It's in the system. Same place it's always been. He frowned slightly, like he'd expected me to walk it over to him on a silver tray. Right, cool, I'll handle it. Big picture stuff, you know. Set the tone with the client. Set the tone, I said. Exactly. He pushed off the doorframe and wandered back to his corner office with the standing desk. I sat there for a moment. He was going to call Diane Halloran. Diane, who once told me she signs with people, not logos. Diane, who'd watched me drive proofs to her store openings for 9 years. He was going to call her up, this man she'd never met, and set the tone. I almost picked up the phone to coach him. 11 years of reflex, the worker bee, reaching to fix it before anyone got hurt. I put the phone down. He set the direction. He said so himself. I let him. The first real crack came on a Tuesday. Bradley called a meeting, he loved meetings now, to announce that he'd renegotiated our paper supplier contract. He'd seen the rates I'd locked in 2 years earlier and decided he could do better. So he'd gone to a cheaper supplier without telling anyone, signed a new deal, and switched our stock. The cheaper paper had a different brightness and a slightly different weight. To Bradley, paper was paper. To anyone who'd ever held a Marrow and Vine circular, the difference was instantly visible. Their brand was built on rich, saturated produce photography, tomatoes that looked like you could bite them. On the new stock, the reds went dull. The greens went muddy. The floor supervisor, a guy named Hector who'd run presses for 22 years, flagged it immediately. He came to me, because everyone still came to me out of habit. "Tessa, this new stock is going to be a problem for the grocery account. Their photos look like dishwater." "You should tell Bradley," I said. "He set the direction." Hector gave me a long look. He'd been at that quarterly meeting. He understood exactly what I was doing and exactly why. "Yeah," he said. "I'll tell him." He told him. Bradley, in his A New Chapter confidence, told Hector the new stock was fine and that the savings were what real leadership looks like. Hector shrugged and ran the job on the cheap paper because that was the direction he'd been given, and it wasn't his company anymore either. 40,000 circulars went out to 41 stores on paper that made fresh produce look like it had been left in the sun. I knew, the moment those skids left the dock, that Diane Halloran would see them. She saw everything. She'd built her whole career on noticing. When Diane Halloran opened that box of dull, muddy circulars, the ones that were supposed to sell her summer produce, there was exactly one thing she was always going to do. The thing 9 years of trust trains a person to do without thinking. She called me. Of course she called me. 9 years of habit run deep on both sides of a relationship. My cell buzzed at 4:40 on a Thursday, and her name came up, and I felt 11 years of instinct unfurl. "Tessa," she said. "No hello." "What happened to my circulars? My tomatoes look like they have a disease." I closed my office door. And here is where I had to make a choice, and I want to be honest about it because it wasn't simple. I could fix this. I could have told her we'd reprint on the good stock at our cost, soothed her, smoothed it over, protected the account the way I'd protected it 100 times. The worker bee, humming, stinging nothing. Or I could tell her the truth. I told her the truth. "Diane," I said, "I have to be straight with you because you've earned that from me. There have been changes here. My brother's running the company now. He switched our paper to a cheaper stock to cut costs. I flagged it. The floor flagged it. The decision was made above me." There was a silence on the line. The kind of silence where someone recalculates everything. "Above you," she repeated. "I don't make those calls anymore," I said. "I just handle the accounts I'm assigned. Are you still on my account?" For now," I said. "I honestly don't know for how long. My brother told me last week he wants to take the lead on your renewal himself. Set the tone," he said. Another silence. "Tessa," she said slowly, "is this you telling me something?" And here's where I drew the line I'd been walking toward since that conference room. "This is me telling you the truth about your circulars and who decided to print them on bad paper," I said. "What you do with that is your call. I'm not going to badmouth my family to you, Diane, but I'm also not going to lie to you to keep an account I don't own." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you for being honest. I've always trusted you to be honest." And she hung up. I sat in my office with my heart going harder than I'd let on. I hadn't poached the account. I hadn't told her to leave. I'd answered her questions truthfully when she called me. That's all. But I knew Diane, and I knew that "I sign with people, not with logos" wasn't a line. It was who she was. I didn't tell Bradley about the call. He'd set the direction. The direction would speak for itself. I told you there'd be a moment things looked worst right before they turned. This is it. Because what happened next made me think for about a week that I'd ruined everything for nothing. Bradley found out about the circular problem the way he found out about most things. Late and loudly. Diane's office sent a formal complaint, copied to Bradley as the new owner. He came charging out of his corner office, waving a printout, furious, looking for someone to blame. He found me. "Did you know about this?" he demanded in front of half the office. "The grocery account is complaining about the print quality. Did you know?" I kept my voice level. "Hector flagged the paper stock at the meeting where you announced the switch. I was there. So were you. You're the account manager. You should have caught this. This is your job." And here's the part that stung worst, because it was so familiar I could have predicted it word for word. "You did this on purpose," he said, lowering his voice into something nastier. "You're trying to make me look bad. You're bitter about the company, and you're sabotaging me." The whole floor was watching. Hector, the junior operators, Renee, who hadn't left yet, my brother in his expensive suit accusing me of sabotage in front of everyone for a decision he'd made over my objection. I felt the old urge to defend myself, to lay out the timeline, to prove I was right, to win the argument. I didn't. I service the accounts I'm assigned, I said quietly. You told me, and Dad told me, that you set the direction now. You switched the paper. You wanted the lead on the grocery account. I flagged the stock. It's all in the system. I paused. I'm not sabotaging anything, Bradley. I'm just not covering for you anymore. His face went red. What's that supposed to mean? It means for 11 years I caught everything before it became a problem, and nobody noticed because that was just Tessa being Tessa. Worker bee. I picked up my coffee. Worker bees can stop, Bradley. They just usually don't. He didn't have an answer. He told me, voice shaking, to get the grocery account back in line, and stormed back to his office. That night, I went home certain I'd made a catastrophe. Diane was cooling. The biggest account in the company was wobbling, and I'd just told my brother, in front of everyone, that I'd stopped covering for him. It felt less like power and more like standing in the road watching a truck I'd stepped out of finally start to roll. Paul listened to all of it over dinner. When I finished, he didn't tell me it would be okay. He's not a liar. You didn't lie, you didn't poach, you didn't sabotage, he said. You told the truth, and you stopped doing free labor for people who told you to your face you weren't leadership. He topped off my water. If the whole thing falls apart because one person stopped propping it up, Tessa, that was never your weight to carry alone in the first place. That's just the truth showing. It didn't feel like enough that night, but it was the truest thing anyone said to me through the whole mess. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known sitting at my kitchen table feeling like I'd burned it all down, was that Diane Halloran had already made up her mind, and she hadn't made it up about the paper. The thing about being the worker bee for 11 years is that you build a hive nobody sees but you. I didn't know how much of Ellison Print Works was actually me until I stopped, and the silence started showing where I'd been holding things up. 3 days after Bradley screamed at me on the floor, our second largest account called. Not Marrow and Vine, the law firm I'd renewed weeks earlier. Their office manager, a woman I'd worked with for years, called my cell directly. Tessa, are you leaving Ellison? Somebody told us there's been a shakeup. We just want to know if our point of contact is changing, because honestly, we work with you. We've never even met anyone else over there. I told her I was still there for now, but I noted it. We work with you. We've never met anyone else. It wasn't just Diane. It was all of them. 9 years, 11 years of relationships, and not one of them ran through Bradley or my father. They ran through me. The company my family had handed back and forth like an heirloom was, underneath the oak table and the family name, a network of people who picked up the phone because of one person. And that person had just had her name said with contempt in front of 40 people. I didn't gloat. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to. I didn't call anyone and whisper that the ship was sinking. I kept showing up. I kept servicing my accounts honestly. But I stopped pretending the building was sound because it wasn't, and I was tired of being the only one who knew. Then Bradley did the thing that told me exactly how scared he was underneath all the leadership talk. He tried to lock me down. It started with an email sent to me and copied to my father with the subject line Account Transition Protocol. In it, Bradley announced that effective immediately, all client contact had to be routed through ownership for quality control. Translation: I was no longer allowed to talk to my own clients without his sign-off. He also wanted me to write up complete relationship handover documents for every account. Names, histories, personal details, the soft knowledge I carried in my head. Who liked a call before 9, who needed flattery, who needed bluntness, whose kid played hockey. He wanted me to download 11 years of relationships into a Word document so he could fire me and keep them. I almost laughed, because that's not how it works. You can write down a phone number. You can't write down 9 years of driving proofs out in the rain. You can't hand somebody trust in a spreadsheet. But I understood the move. Somewhere in his gut, Bradley had finally sensed that the accounts were tied to me and not to the logo, and instead of valuing me for it, his instinct was to extract it and discard me. The same instinct my whole family had, just made literal. I replied to the email in 2 sentences. Happy to document account logistics, renewal dates, specs, billing cycles, all already in the shared system. Relationships aren't transferable on paper. They're built over years, which is why they're called relationships. My father called me an hour later. First time he'd called me in weeks. Tessa, your brother's just trying to protect the company, he said. These handover documents are standard. Every business does it. Why are you being difficult? I'm not being difficult, Dad. I'm telling you a fact. You can't bottle the thing that makes a client stay and pour it into someone else. They're our clients, he said, and there it was, the whole world view in 2 words. Our clients. Like the people who signed those contracts were assets the family owned, not human beings who chose every year to keep working with one person they trusted. They're nobody's clients, I said, and I heard my grandfather's pencil note in my own voice. They're people who keep their word to the people who keep theirs. Whoever holds the relationship holds the account. Everything else is rented. There was a silence on the line. Where did you hear that? My father asked, and something in his voice had changed. Grandpa, I said. He wrote it down. I found it in his old document box behind the letterhead. He knew, Dad. He knew it 60 years ago. My father didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said stiffly, just write the handover documents, Tessa, and hung up. I did, eventually, write them. The logistical parts, renewal dates, paper specs, billing terms. Everything that was already in the system anyway. I left nothing out and I added nothing in because there was nothing to add. The soft knowledge wasn't mine to give away even if I'd wanted to. It lived in 9 years of a relationship between 2 people, and one of those people was about to leave. But the handover protocol did something Bradley didn't intend. It made me start counting. Because when I sat down to document the accounts, I saw the whole picture at once, laid out in numbers, the way I never had when I was just living inside it day to day. I'd brought in 31 of the company's 44 active accounts. Of the 13 I hadn't personally landed, 9 had come to us through Renee, which meant that between the 2 of us, the 2 worker bees Bradley was either firing or sidelining, we'd brought in 40 of the company's 44 clients. 4. My father and Bradley and the family name had, between them, kept exactly 4 accounts that didn't run through me or Renee, and 2 of those were old friends of my grandfather's who were close to retiring. I sat with that math for a long time. I'd always known, in a vague way, that I did a lot. I hadn't known it was almost everything. Nobody had ever added it up, least of all me, because adding it up would have meant facing how much I'd given to people who called me a worker bee. That was the night I stopped feeling guilty. Around the same time, I learned why Bradley was so desperate, and it wasn't only ego. Hector mentioned it, almost offhand, at the dock. You hear about the equipment loan? I hadn't. It turned out Bradley, in his first month, had taken out a sizable loan against the company to buy a new high-speed press he was sure would modernize our capabilities. He'd done it without consulting anyone who actually ran the floor, which meant he'd bought a model that was wrong for our jobs, overpowered for our run sizes, expensive to maintain, and so new that our operators would need months of training to use it well. It sat half-installed in the back of the plant like a beached whale, and the loan payment started in 60 days. Bradley had leveraged the company to buy a machine it didn't need, while gutting the relationship budget that actually brought in revenue, while alienating the biggest client we had. He'd taken a stable, modestly profitable business and, in about 10 weeks, turned it into a debt-loaded operation, betting everything on a renewal he was about to mishandle. He wasn't just arrogant. He was drowning, and he'd tied the company to himself on the way down. The desperate handover protocol, the price increase he was about to spring on Diane. It was a man underwater grabbing at anything that floated. I want you to predict something here. With a loan payment coming, the relationship budget gone, his best people leaving, and the biggest account cooling, what do you think Bradley did to fix it? Did he humble himself? Did he ask for help? Tell me your guess. I'll show you what he actually did. He doubled down. The next week, Bradley tried to fix Marrow and Vine himself. He called Diane to set the tone. I heard about the call later, partly from Diane and partly from how Bradley looked when he came out of his office afterward, gray in the face. He'd opened by introducing himself as the new owner and the future of the company. He'd talked about his vision, his leadership, the exciting new direction. He'd assured her the paper issue was a minor hiccup from an account manager who's being transitioned out, meaning me. Then he'd gotten to the renewal. He'd come in confident, ready to negotiate, and this is the part that tells you everything about Bradley. He'd tried to raise their rate by 9% because he'd looked at the revenue number and decided our biggest client could absorb a price increase. He raised the price on the account that was 38% of revenue, the week after botching their print quality, to a buyer who signs with people, not logos, and whose person he'd just announced he was transitioning out. Diane, by her own account to me later, was very polite on the call. She thanked him for the information. She said she'd review the renewal terms with her team. She did not commit to anything. What Bradley didn't understand, what he couldn't understand because he'd never built a single relationship in his life, was that "I'll review it with my team" from a buyer like Diane wasn't a maybe. It was the sound of a door closing softly so you wouldn't hear the latch. He came out of his office afterward, telling everyone the call had gone great. He told my father the renewal was basically locked. He told Hector to start scheduling press time for the summer circular run, confident, expansive, already taking credit for the win in his head. He'd convinced himself that being the owner was the same as being trusted, that the chair conferred the relationship. I sat at my desk and listened to him celebrate a thing that had already died, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Something closer to grief. Because I could see the whole shape of it coming, the loss, the layoffs, the good people on that floor who'd done nothing wrong, and there was nothing I could do to stop it that I hadn't already tried. I'd flagged the paper. I'd warned about Diane. I'd told him to his face. I'd told my mother in a flowered tea room. I'd told my father on the phone. Every warning had been filed under Tessa being difficult. You can only hold up a building so long before the people inside decide the cracks are your imagination. At some point, you have to step out and let them see the ceiling for themselves. Then she did what she told me, 9 years ago, she would always do. The Marrow and Vine renewal was due the second week of June, the anchor of our whole year. Bradley had it circled on his calendar as his big win, the moment he'd prove he was the leader the family always said he was. The week before it was due, I got a call. It was Diane, but it wasn't about the renewal. "Tessa," she said, "I'm going to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me the way you always have been. Are you staying at Ellison?" I'd known somewhere that the question was coming. I'd thought about little else for a month. "No," I said, "I don't think I am." What would it take," she said, "for you to come work somewhere your name was actually on the door?" I sat very still. She explained it plainly, the way she did everything. Marrow and Vine was expanding. They were tired of vendor drama. They'd been talking internally about bringing print management in-house, or contracting with a smaller, dedicated partner they could trust completely, and the partner Diane trusted completely was me. "Not Ellison," she said. "You. If you started something on your own or went somewhere solid, we'd come with you. 41 stores, the whole account. I've already floated it past my VP." He said, and I'm quoting him, "If Tessa Ellison runs it, I'll sign tomorrow." I want to tell you I said something graceful. What I actually did was stare at the framed bakery business cards on my office wall, the first thing I ever sold solo, for a long 10 seconds. "Diane," I said, "I haven't even quit yet." "Then quit," she said, "and let me know where to send the contract." I did not run out of that building cackling. The reversal, when it came, was the quietest thing in this whole story. I'd spent 11 years thinking I needed my family to hand me something. And it turned out the thing I'd been building the entire time, the trust, the relationships, the 9 years of driving proofs out in my own car, was never theirs to give or withhold. It was already mine. It had always been mine. I just kept leaving it on their table. For the first time in my life, the thing I'd been begging people to give me was something I could finally see I already held in my own 2 hands. There was one conversation I had to have first, though, with Bradley, alone. I didn't have to. I want to be honest about that. I could have just resigned by email and let the consequences arrive on their own schedule. but something in me, maybe the part that still remembered him carrying me on his shoulders at the 4th of July parade when I was 6, wanted to give him one real chance to see it before it was too late. Not to save my decision, to save him from his. I knocked on his corner office door that evening after the floor had cleared. He was at the standing desk scrolling through something, the half-installed press visible through the window behind him like a monument to a bad bet. "Got a minute?" I said. "For you?" "Sure." He said it with that little flick of condescension he'd perfected since the meeting. I sat down across from him, in the chair that cost more than a junior operator's monthly pay. "Bradley," I said, "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to actually hear it, because I don't think anyone's going to tell you again until it's too late." I kept my voice level, the way I always did. Marrow and Vine is going to leave, not because of the paper, because of who they trust, and the price increase, and the fact that you told their head of procurement you were transitioning out the only person she's worked with for 9 years. He leaned back. "Here we go. Tessa knows best. Tessa, who's so important the whole company falls apart without her." "I'm not saying I'm important," I said. "I'm saying the relationships are. And the relationships don't live in this office or in the family name. They live in the people you're firing and sidelining and insulting. You took a loan against a company whose revenue is held up by 4 or 5 individual humans, and then you started driving those humans out. That's not a vision problem, Bradley. That's a math problem." For just a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, maybe. The water rising, and then, the way it always did with him, the fear turned into venom. You know what your problem is," he said, standing up because he always needed the height. "You've spent your whole life jealous that I'm the one Dad believed in, and now that I finally have the company, you can't stand it, so you're spinning some story about how it all secretly runs on you. It doesn't, Tessa. You're a good account manager. That's it. That's all you've ever been. And the second you walk out that door, you'll find out exactly how replaceable you are." There it was. The whole thing, said out loud, by him, with no one to perform it for. Not jealousy, not bitterness. Just a man so committed to the story that he was the chosen one that he'd rather sink the ship than admit the worker bee was the one keeping it afloat. I stood up too, not to match his height, just to leave. "Okay, Bradley," I said. "I hope you're right. I really do. Because if you're wrong, a lot of good people on that floor are going to lose their jobs, and it won't be my fault, and it won't be theirs." "Is that a threat?" "It's a forecast," I said. "There's a difference. A threat is something I do. A forecast is just me reading the weather you made." He didn't have an answer for that. He stood there in his expensive office, in front of his expensive mistake, and watched me walk out. I closed the door quietly behind me. I'm not the kind of person who slams them. The story was going to make all the noise it needed to on its own. I gave my notice the next morning. I didn't make a speech. I didn't slam a door. I wrote a short professional resignation letter, 2 weeks' notice, addressed to Bradley as the owner and copied to my father, who still came in most days to advise. I walked it into Bradley's corner office and set it on his expensive standing desk. He read it. He laughed, actually laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You're quitting? Now? Right before the grocery renewal? After you tanked their print quality?" He shook his head. "This is so like you, Tessa. You can't handle that I'm in charge, so you're running away." "Fine. Go. We'll be fine. We were always going to be fine." "Okay," I said. That was it. That was my whole reply. "Okay. I'd learned, finally, that you don't have to win the argument. You just have to be right and let time do the rest." My father caught me in the hallway as I was leaving his, Bradley's, office. Gerald Ellison in his navy blazer looking at me with something I couldn't quite read. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," I said, which was technically true. I hadn't signed anything. "You know this is your home," he said. "This company. Your grandfather built it. There'll always be a place for you here, as an account manager." He said it like a generosity, the same shape as my mother's tea-room kindness. "Thank you," I said, "but I think I'm going to go build something with my name on it." He frowned, not understanding, and I didn't explain. There was nothing to explain that he was equipped to hear. I cleared my desk for real this time. The bakery business cards, the leather folder of renewals, I left every account file in the system, current and complete, because I'm not the kind of person who burns a hive on the way out. The 46 people on that floor didn't deserve sabotage. They deserved better leadership than they were about to get, but that wasn't something I could give them on my way out the door. Hector caught me at the dock. "You're really going." "I'm really going." He looked at the presses, then back at me. "It's going to get ugly here, isn't it?" "It's going to get honest," I said. "Sometimes that's the same thing." I started Ellison and Halloran Print Solutions out of a leased warehouse space across town 6 weeks later. I kept my own name, Ellison, because it was mine too, and I wasn't going to let them have it. Marrow and Vine signed with me the week I opened. 41 stores, the full account. Diane's VP signed it the day the paperwork was ready, exactly as he'd said he would. 38% of what had been my family's revenue walked across town and signed for me because it had only ever been signing for me. Nobody engineered it. Nobody schemed it into being. The account simply went where the trust was, the way water goes downhill. The law firm followed within a month. Then the brewery. Then 2 more accounts I'd brought in over the years, each one calling me, not the other way around. I never made a single poaching call. I didn't have to. I just opened a door with my name on it, and the people who'd been signing with me for years walked through it. I want to slow down here because the months that followed were the proof of everything my grandfather wrote on that yellowed sheet of paper, and I don't want to compress them into a sentence the way my family compressed 11 years of my work. The first month, it was just me, Hector, and a single mid-size press in a leased warehouse with a leaking roof and a space heater. I'd taken a second mortgage on the house to make payroll, and I'll say plainly, the only money in this story I ever moved around was my own, out in the open, signed at a bank like anyone else. No secret help, no hidden hand, just me betting on the thing I'd always been able to do. Diane sent over the Marrow and Vine print files the first week, and we ran their summer circular ourselves, the 2 of us, late into the night. On the good stock, the reds came back. The tomatoes looked like you could bite them. When the first skid rolled off, Hector and I just stood there looking at it. 11 years of doing this for people who called it support work, and here it was, the same work, in a building with my name over the door. By the second month, I'd hired Renee. She walked into my warehouse, looked at the leaking roof and the space heater and the one press, and started crying, which I'd never once seen her do in 18 years. "You came for me," she said. "You're not support staff here," I told her. "You're a founding partner of this client list, and we both know it." I gave her the dental group back. She had them re-signed within 2 weeks, because of course she did. The kid Bradley had handed them to had let their billing lapse and missed 3 Sunday proof deadlines. They'd been waiting for someone who knew their dentist reviewed proofs on Sundays. They'd been waiting for Renee. By the 4th month, we'd outgrown the leaking warehouse and signed a lease on a real building. A former sign shop with good light and a loading dock that actually worked. I hired 2 junior operators, then a third. I brought on a young woman named Priya as an account coordinator and did the one thing my family never did for me. I told her, out loud, on her first day, that the relationships she built would be hers, that they'd count, that nobody would ever call her a worker bee in my building and mean it as the ceiling of what she was. By the 6th month, we had 11 employees and were turning away work. The milestones came one after another, each one small, each one concrete, each one the kind of thing my father would have waved away as not the big picture. A new press, bought with cash, not a loan. The day I paid off the second mortgage, the day Diane's company expanded into a 4th state and gave us the new region without even putting it out to bid. The day a competitor I'd respected for years called to ask if I'd be interested in acquiring their client list, because they were retiring and they wanted the accounts to go somewhere they'd be cared for. Somewhere they'd be cared for. He'd watched me drive proofs out in the rain for a decade. He knew exactly where that was. There was one milestone I didn't see coming. About 5 months in, Danny, the junior operator Bradley had humiliated at that town hall over the paper stock, showed up at my warehouse in his street clothes, nervous, holding a resume he didn't need. "Ellison's letting people go," he said. "I heard you were hiring. I run a press clean. You saw it." I had seen it. He was good. Better than Bradley ever knew, because Bradley had never once stood at a press long enough to find out. You asked the right question at that town hall, I told him, the one that would have saved them if anyone had listened. You don't need the resume, Danny. You need a locker. Pick one. He runs my #2 press now. Last month, he caught a registration drift on a marrow and vine job that would have cost us 40,000 pieces, and he flagged it at 10 at night, and we fixed it before it ever left the dock. The exact kind of save I'd made for Diane 9 years ago. The exact kind of save my family had called the little details. The little details are the whole company. My grandfather knew it. I knew it. And now Danny knows it because I told him the truth at the press instead of making him feel small at a town hall. The big picture, it turned out, was just 1,000 small pictures, drawn by hand over years, by the person everyone kept telling to relax and let someone else be the face. Here's what happened at Ellison Print Works, the way I heard it, mostly from Hector and a little from my mother in the brittle calls that came later. The marrow and vine renewal didn't happen. Bradley waited for Diane to sign the rate increase he'd proposed. Diane never called back. By the time Bradley realized the account was simply gone, not negotiating, gone. It was July, and the loss had blown a 38% hole in the year. He tried to find new business to replace it, but Bradley had never landed an account in his life. He didn't know how. He made some calls. He took some lunches he could no longer expense because he'd cut that budget himself. He learned 4 months too late that setting the tone and big picture vision don't actually generate revenue. Relationships do. The unglamorous, invisible worker bee labor of being the person someone trusts. The exact thing he'd handed away while calling it nothing. By September, Ellison Print Works was laying people off. Hector got out early and came to work for me. He was the first person I hired, and he runs my floor now. Renee, who'd left months before, I brought on too. Slowly, the actual builders of that old company found their way to the new one. My father came to see me in November. He showed up at my warehouse unannounced in the navy blazer and stood in my doorway looking at the presses, the floor, the people, the small sign over the door that said Ellison and Halloran. "This is good work," he said quietly. He sounded almost surprised. "It's the same work I always did," I said, "just mine now." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said the closest thing to an apology I ever got from him, which wasn't very close. "We may have miscalculated," he said, "with Bradley. The company's struggling. I always thought the relationships would just transfer. The name, the clients. I didn't understand that they were—" He stopped. "That they were me," I said. He didn't say yes, he couldn't quite, but he didn't say no. "Is there any way," he started, "any chance you'd consider coming back to help right the ship? You could have shares this time, a real stake." And there it was. The thing I'd wanted my whole life, offered now, in a doorway, only because they were drowning. Shares, a real stake. The exact words I'd ached to hear at that conference table 4 months earlier. I thought about it longer than you might expect. Not because I wanted to go back, because I wanted to be sure I was saying no for the right reason. "No," I said, "I don't think so. If you've ever had to walk away from family, the people who were supposed to see your worth and only saw it once it cost them everything, I want to hear from you. What did you finally let yourself stop carrying? Tell me." I read them all. "Dad," I said, "I spent 35 years trying to be enough for this family. I drove proofs out in the rain. I caught every fire. I kept this place alive and let you call me a worker bee because somewhere I believed if I just worked hard enough, you'd finally see me as someone who could hold something. And then you handed the whole thing to Bradley at a table in front of 19 people and told me I was good with clients." He flinched at that. Good. He should. "You're offering me shares now because the relationships left when I did. Not because you suddenly see me. Because you finally see what I was worth now that it's gone. That's not a gift, Dad. That's a bill coming due. Tessa, I have a company now," I said. "It has my name on it, the first name and the last, and every account here signed with me because they chose to, not because anyone passed me down like furniture." I softened a little because he looked old in my doorway, and because I'm not Bradley. "I hope you and Mom are okay. I mean that. But I'm not coming back to rescue a company that handed me away. I'm done leaving what's mine on other people's tables." He nodded slowly. He didn't argue. I think, for the first time in his life, he didn't have the words because the world had just done the one thing he'd never imagined it could. It had run out his way of seeing it. Ellison Print Works closed the following spring. My father sold the building and the old presses to pay off the debt Bradley had run up trying to be a leader. The reclaimed oak table my grandfather built, the one I'd done my homework on, the one where they signed the company over to my brother, sat in a warehouse auction lot. Bradley couldn't bear to keep it, and my parents had downsized. I bought it. I had Hector go to the auction so nobody would know it was me. It sits in my conference room now, in the building with my name on the door. I do my renewals at it. I signed the second Marrow and Vine contract at it. They re-upped for 3 years. 46 stores now. They kept growing. The day it was delivered, I did one thing before I let anyone use it. I took my grandfather's pencil note out of my bag. I'd carried it for months by then, folded along its old creases, and I had it framed. It hangs on the wall of my conference room now, above the oak table he built. Whoever holds the relationships holds the company. Everything else is rented. My father saw it the first time he visited. He stood in front of it for a long time, reading it the way I had 4 times over. He recognized the handwriting. I watched something move across his face. Grief, maybe, or the particular ache of a man realizing his own father had handed him the answer 60 years ago and he'd spent his whole life renting instead of holding. "He never showed me this," my father said quietly. "He didn't have to show you, Dad," I said. "He showed you with the whole company. You just thought the company was the building." Sometimes I run my hand over the grain of that table and think about the boy who was supposed to hold the company and the worker bee who was supposed to just keep doing what she did best. I did keep doing what I did best. I just stopped doing it for people who told me I wasn't the one who got to hold anything. Bradley and I don't talk. My mother and I talk a few times a year, careful, distant conversations where she's started lately to call me such a smart businesswoman, in a voice that's trying to rewrite the worker bee out of history. I let her. There's no point. My father comes by once in a while. He doesn't ask to come back anymore. He just sits at the old oak table while I work and watches the floor and says, sometimes, "Your grandfather would be proud of this." I think he means it. I think it's the only way he knows how to say the thing he should have said at that conference table 11 years too early. Here's what I know now. What I'd tell you if you were sitting across that oak table from me. The people who hand you out like you're theirs to give, they were never the ones who decided your worth. They just convinced you they were. You can spend your whole life trying to be handed something, or you can look down and notice that the thing you were begging for has been in your own 2 hands the entire time. I stopped leaving what was mine on their table. You can pick yours up too.